Hi YouTube, Brian James, I'm mk2 guy, and in this edition I'm going to be telling you my appraisal between this, my Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, and this, my Lumix G9. Join me. Well, hi YouTube, Brian James, I'm mk2 guy, back with you once again. And a couple of weeks ago you might recall that I went out and purchased a used but in very good condition Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II. It's a camera I'd hang it over for quite a while, and basically this was bought because I already had an EM1 Mark I, the original EM1, but I also had purchased this Lumix G9 brand new a couple of years ago. And the reason I wanted the 1 Mark II is the fact that when I bought the G9 I compared the two together, and at the time this was before the Mark III version of the Olympus came out, and these were the competitors between the two. You did have the EM1X, but I put that as a much bigger camera in a different sort of league as to what we're talking about here. These are the top of the range pro model cameras for normal photographers. I class the EM1X as something as a specialist camera and has its own unique pros and cons to it. So we're really comparing these two. I've been asked a few times since I bought the camera to get online and give my appraisal of the differences of them. So that's what I intend to do here. Now it's worth saying that from the outset I don't do deep spec sort of comparisons. If you want to do that, get onto a website, go and have a look on the Olympus EM1 Mark II specifications and for Lumix G9 specifications, and they will be able to tell you everything you know about every little detail about the specifications. What they won't tell you is what it's like to use and what it's like for a normal photographer to use. That's what I'm going to do here. So if you want those, by all means download them, pore over those specifications, fill your boots. I'm sure you'll enjoy them, but that's not what you're going to find here. However, this is going to be as much of an honest appraisal of what I've managed in the last couple of weeks of using this for the photography I've been doing, to try and give you an idea as to what my thoughts between them are. Now don't forget, if you're not a subscriber to this channel, please hit the little grey subscribe button below. It has changed from red to grey, so it takes a little bit of looking for now, and there's also a little bell beside it to give notifications every time I upload a video. If you enjoy this video, give me a big thumbs up, because that helps YouTube's algorithms to promote this to more and more people so that they can see it. And finally, of course, if you get the chance and you like this and you fancy just supporting the channel somewhat, there's a link below for PayPal if you want to buy me a coffee. I'd appreciate that. Now, this is going to be interesting because, as I say, these two cameras in my mind were fighting each other when I bought the G9. So why did I go for the G9? And why did I not go for the EM1 Mark II at the time? Well, let's go back a couple of years to about 2019 when I bought this. This was on a deal through the local camera dealers. Proper UK spec camera, wasn't a grey import, these were proper supported cameras. And it was coming for about £800, including the battery grip. Brand new camera from the dealers with a full warranty. These at the time were about £1,300, the EM1. And looking at the specs, as I say, I'm not going to go into in-depth spec on this, but they were so similar as to what they could achieve. It was untrue. Both have the 20 megapixel sensor, which is the largest sensor in the mk2 currently. There's a tiny little difference between them, but they're effectively both 20 megapixel sensors. Both sensors coming from pretty much the same place, so the quality is pretty much the same. There is a difference insofar as the colour technology between the two, and that's down to manufacturers. And if you prefer the Olympus over the Lumix or vice versa, then that's the one you're going to go for anyway. Personally, any sort of inconsistencies like that, though, I can get out in post-production in Lightroom anyway, and I don't find a huge amount between them. I've been an Olympus shooter almost as long as I've been professional. My very first professional camera that I bought was an Olympus OM1N film camera, which you've seen in reviews. I'll put a link above to the review of my 40-year-old camera. I've been shooting professionally on and off, not all the time, but I've been shooting professionally on and off for about 30 years. So I've had a fair bit of experience at shooting professionally on cameras. So I know what feels good and doesn't feel good in the hand. I've owned cameras of all sorts of systems. But I've settled on the mk2 because it fits what I'm doing at the moment, and that's an important point to make. This review is not saying what's the best. That's not what I'm trying to tell you to do. If you find a camera which feels better to you, then that's the right camera for you. This is my appraisal of what feels right for me. So, got two fairly well balanced cameras here, and effectively, what did I find between them? Well, I made a few notes on this. Weight wise, I put them on scales. Obviously I've got a little extra strap part on here, but I actually physically measured them. I don't necessarily believe what I see on specifications. So when I put them onto the scales beside me, well, before I'll tell you what the weight was, I'll tell you what I felt. Picking this, the Lumix up, it's big, heavy and chunky. The Olympus seems a little bit more svelte, a little bit more genteel, petite. But in actual fact, in the hand, to a degree, it felt heavier. However, that wasn't the case borne out by the scales. On my scales, this particular camera with no lens on and no lens cap and no camera cap was 663 grams. This one, in the same spec, with battery by the way, both with battery, was 583, so it's about 80 grams between them. So actually this is the lighter one, but it feels heavy and chunky, and in some ways, although both are solid cameras, the Olympus feels a little bit more physically solid. It feels a little bit more metallic, if you like. But one thing I'll stress as I go through this, almost every difference I'm telling you is a small one. So when I'm on about this being a little bit more sturdy feeling, that doesn't mean to say that the Panasonic isn't. The Panasonic is incredibly sturdy. It's a small amount. One thing, let's go and look at the G9 first of all. Although I've got the wrong lens. I've got the Olympus lens on the Lumix and the Lumix lens on the Olympus. Well, that just shows that it's micro four thirds format. You can swap and change around, which is great. I love the grip on this. This G9 has such a wonderful grip. It's large. It has a slight ridge inside on the fingers as well, so that if you are holding it, you get a little bit extra grip. The rubber it feels quite sticky in the hand, which is good. It's not a horrible stickiness. It seems to grip your fingers. And also I find that the thumb grip on the back, the little raised part for the thumb, just feels really nice. This I could hold all day, and it's ideal. I tend to use a wrist strap, so most of the time I'm holding the camera with a wrist strap around and I'm holding it like that. Works a treat. The Olympus, as I say, feels more petite. It is a smaller grip. It's chamfered out somewhat there. It has a slight indent, but I don't feel it's quite so good. Still just as tacky in the hand when you get that sort of stickiness on the skin, which is good, but a different sort of texture. The thumb grip doesn't quite extend so far. It's still good, but it doesn't quite extend as far out as the Lumix. So I would say on this one, I've got to give the overall hold in the hand feel to the Lumix. However, the Lumix feels incredibly big and chunky. It feels like a massive camera in comparison to the Olympus. The Olympus, as I say, feels rather petite. It feels a little powerhouse really. The Lumix feels something of a brute in comparison. And compared to the aps-c and full frame cameras I've used in the past, of course, they still both feel quite small. Overall, slight edge, I would say, handling wise to the Lumix, but again, it's so small it's untrue. One thing I did notice though is that the Olympus, the buttons on the back are very, very flush to the back surface, which means that they're a little bit harder to push. You have to consciously push them if you want to operate them. However, they are less easy to accidentally operate than the Lumix. The Lumix buttons tend to stand quite domed and proud, and it is easier to actually accidentally press one of those buttons. Both of them though, both the cameras, the buttons are solid. They're not wishy-washy. They're firm. They're definite buttons when you press them, and they feel good. No complaints on those for either. Both have fully articulating screens, and both the screens are around about the same size. Again, if you want to find out if one's 1 or 2 millimeters different and how many dots difference it is insofar as resolution, have a look at the spec sheet. If you want to realise what they're both like though, they're both fully articulating, 270 degrees round, and flip away, so you can either have them safe and covered away, or flip around and you can have the touchscreen open at the back. They both do the same thing, and for taking selfies, ideal. Same as on the G8 that I'm using at the moment. One of the things that I would say though, where the G9 really does excel, is the EVF eyepiece. The EVF in this must be 20 or 30% bigger than the one in the Olympus, and it shows. It looks massive when you're looking through it. It really does. And also the rubber surround, I don't know if we can see the difference on the two. I'll just fold this screen back away. But the rubber surround on the Lumix really does make a very comfortable position for your eyes to go onto. The Olympus it's a harder rubber, it's a thinner rubber. It's not unpleasant, but I do find that the Lumix just is a joy to use. The other thing is this V mode switch, which is up on the top there. If you're shooting and you wear glasses, the screen can appear too large inside the eyepiece and you start losing the edges of it. By going through the V mode, we'll actually reduce the size of it inside the EVF, and it makes people who are wearing glasses have a much easier time. Really is a winner on that one. So on the EVF, I would say that the Lumix definitely wins. The other thing which I'm not so keen on the EVF on the Olympus for though as well, both have a sensor to automatically switch between the eyepiece and the rear screen. So as you bring it in, there's a proximity switch. As you bring the camera in towards the eye, as you get close, there's a little sensor in there which says that, and it'll switch to the eyepiece rather than the rear screen. I find the Olympus works too well. It operates too far away. So if I'm actually trying to do a low down shot where I'm using this and I bring it too close to my body, it will actually, even from this distance, switch this screen off and put it over there. So you end up having to do shots much further away than you'd like to. The Lumix will do that occasionally, but not very often. It's just about spot on for this. The problem I find on the Lumix though is if I'm using in a selfie mode, if I tilt the screen much more than 10 or 15 degrees, it'll flip it. So you suddenly find that the display is upside down. And sometimes you want to look down on top of it to actually see what you're doing. Suddenly it's upside down. So I did find that a bit of a pain at times as well. Again, these are minor problems though. Both these cameras really are at the top of the game though. And insofar as a Micro Four Thirds field, I don't think you're going to find much better than these to be able to do what you want to do. I tend to take mainly stills on these, and the only videos I tend to do tend to be for YouTube, and I shoot everything in 1080p at 25 frames a second. And the reason I do that, I'm in a PAL area, it works well for me. It doesn't take up too much space on the disc. It's easy enough for my editing software to use without overdoing the process or the storage on my hard disk. So I haven't really pushed the video on these at all. However, what I would say is on both of them the video is superb. The Mark 1 version of the EM1 was poor, and it's only recently I've revisited it. And some of the things that people were saying on this was to make sure that I had the newest version of the firmware, which I have. I've got version, I think it's 3.4 is the current one. But on version 3 of the Olympus software, it made a huge difference. And when I started looking back through the specs, the autofocus time when you were using video was incredibly slow. And it's when I started using the Mark 1 version again and checking out what the video was like, I saw what it was. It would take forever to change autofocus from something near to far. The Lumix has been constantly updating, and again the version 2 of the software on this really took it up well. The difference though in the autofocus is the Olympus has both phase and contrast detection on the autofocus. The Lumix is quite heavily criticised insofar as having only contrast autofocus. There is another upgrade, version 2.4 is coming out this week, so we've got to see what happens on that. And this should be taking the autofocus up to a similar level to what you've seen on the S5, so let's see what happens on there. However, for what I use these for the focusing and the type of video I'm doing, I don't find a problem. If you are a heavy use videographer, you will probably find that the limited range of recording styles on this compared to this, you know, there's 10-bit recording and all sorts of things on the Lumix. From what I can gather, I don't use them, but the Lumix seems to be streets ahead, but the Olympus seems to have it on the autofocus. And again, that seems to be borne out by some of the comments I find online. So just going through my notes down on this one. As I say, this is all down to what I use. The G9, one of the things I really love on the G9, and again this is coming for the fact that I've come from things like Canon 5Ds, Canon 7Ds, Canon 1Ds. The little thumb joystick. The thumb joystick on this is wonderful. So being able to move your focus point with the thumb while it's up to your eye, very, very easy. Hit the button to center it. Wonderful. It really does make focusing, changing the focus point a joy on this. The Olympus, it works, but I've always found that even on the Mark 1 and the Mark 2, they're similar, just having to flick through to get the focus point on with the little four-way buttons, I don't find as easy. I don't find it quite as natural. So definite thumbs up to the Lumix on that little thumb control. The control dials. Control dials really fall nicely to hand. They really do. They fit in the right place, just where I'd expect them. The only drawback is on the G9, and I do find that where I'd like the dial around by my finger at the front, it tends to be having to be lifted up. It's a vertical dial just back from the shutter release, because around the shutter release is your power switch. Having said that, the power switch being there makes this a one-handed operation. I can bring the camera up to my eye. If I've got it on one of the auto modes, I usually shoot on aperture priority. So if I'm shooting, especially with a fixed focal length, if I want to take a photograph, I can switch it on. By the time I've got my eye, it's switched on, take the photo, and it's done, switched off. The Olympus, on the other hand, the power switch on the left-hand side, which makes it a little bit safer in case of accidentally hitting it, but now becomes a two-handed operation. You can't just one-handed get across to there. So for me, again, I prefer the Lumix. Even though the front dial is not quite so readily to hand, I prefer the power switch there. Both of the cameras have the mode dial with a locking button on, which again, from a professional point of view, so you don't knock it in the middle of a shoot, especially if you're doing a high volume shoot like I used to do. There's nothing worse than knocking the control and being 500 or 600 shots down, well, maybe not that many, before you've noticed there's been a difference. So the idea that these are locking is really a pro sort of thing. Both have the same. Superb. The quick menu screens on the back. I love the quick menus. I love having quick menu screens. Both of them are easy to use. Both of them, the touch sensitivity is superb. However, my drawback on the Olympus is it's a little bit too crowded. There's too much on that screen, and you've got to be really accurate if you are going to be touching to get the right place. There's a few times I've gone to hit one of the menu choices and my fingers were just too wide, and I hit the one beside it and had to go back and then choose the one that I wanted, and that takes time. The Lumix doesn't have quite so much on the screen, but at the same time the icons tend to be bigger. The separated boxes tend to be a bit bigger. Again, it's minor little thing, but again the Lumix has it on that one. Just flicking over the page. I'll be making notes as I go. I'm not very good at remembering these off the top of my head. One of the things I would say though is each of the cameras follows their own company's philosophy insofar as operation. I picked up this EM1 Mark II and was instantly at home with it. I've been shooting the Mark 1 version for a good few years now, the 16 megapixel sensor Mark 1, which although seems the same physically, it is actually considerably smaller when you get the two side by side, but the layout is straight down the company lines. And if you go to an EM5, which I had the Mark 1 EM5, any of the EM10s, any of the EM5s or any of the EM1s, you'll find that you can instantly go to what you want in the right time, in the right way. It follows a steady company philosophy. Again, the Lumix, I've got the GX8, I've got the G9 here, and both of which, if you're used to one, the others fall into hand easily. I saw a reply from somebody on one of the comments saying that they just bought themselves a G80. The only time I've used the G80 was at a camera show just to try one, but again, it just fell straight to hand because I knew how the Lumix controls were. The problem comes when you're going cross-platform. Yes, they're all micro four thirds cameras, but the control layouts which are logical on the Olympus don't fall into the same place on the Lumix and vice versa. So if you've been used to using Lumix, getting your hands on the Olympus for the first time feels odd. If you've been used to shooting the Olympus and you get your hands on the Lumix first time, again it feels odd. Neither of them though are hard to get used to. It's just getting your muscle memory around it. There are some differences in what we use, which really do come to fruition when you're using the cameras themselves. The Lumix obviously has the top screen. I really thought, coming from DSLRs, from the Canon world of DSLRs, that was a prerequisite. When I saw the G9 had that, I thought that's a must-have. I don't know how I've managed without it. Interestingly, I very, very rarely ever use it, because I've got so used to the idea of just shooting on what I've got available on the back, where I thought that top screen was going to be a godsend. It's something which really isn't a big problem for me, so I don't worry about that. One of the things I do like about this is the switch between manual focus, single autofocus and continuous autofocus. Very, very easy on this. For the manual, I tend to have to, if I'm using a lens which doesn't have a clutch type like the 17mm does, I tend to set one of these function buttons up to switch between manual and auto. Not quite as good on there, so I do tend to like that on the Olympus. On the Lumix is very, very good. Plus, I do like the timing dial for the multi-shot, for the timer, and for the 6K, all the way around that bottom part. Very, very useful and easy. Having said that, on the Olympus, you've got the nice dual button at the top and the switch to change the modes on that. And again, I don't find much of a problem on there whatsoever. Both of which I have the ISO set up. Single button on the Olympus will do my ISO on the top wheel and my white balance on the bottom. On the Lumix, you've got a separate button for both. Again, horses for courses. Once you get used to one, it's pretty much throughout the range. Once you get used to the other, it's pretty much there throughout their range, but there is a difference if you go cross-platform. Again, once you got used to them, it doesn't make much difference. So, one of the things I do love on this, I do a lot of architectural photography, buildings, churches and the like. And as it happens, one of the things I do like is the distortion of converging parallels. But from a purist photography point of view, that's what you normally try to avoid if you're taking a normal photograph of a building. One of the things I love about this is the built-in Keystone correction on the Olympus. I find I can use it quite a lot. It does decrease the megapixel count, but as you've probably gathered when you've been listening to how I review cameras in the past, when I've been talking, megapixel numbers don't make a huge amount of difference to me. They really don't. Once you get above about 10 megapixel, the rest is just nice icing on the cake bonus, and it allows you to crop in. Well, effectively with the Keystone correction, what you're doing is you are cropping in on this. But I've found it's a great way if you are close to a building, especially the wide angle lens, and you're getting that convergence of the parallels, then it's fairly easy just to go into Keystone mode. And I've got this set up on one of the function buttons so that it literally, you can just wind the wheels and it'll correct it either in the vertical or the horizontal. Very rarely use a horizontal, but I use the vertical quite often. With the Lumix, I haven't found a way to do it on there. If any of these things where if you say, well, there is that on there, you know, why don't you use it on there? It's because I haven't found it yet. So if it is on there, I haven't found it yet. Having said that, I use Lightroom, and on both of those there is Keystone correction on that. The difference is, if you're going to do it post-production, you've got to remember to leave a big enough gap at the sides, because it will crop off. Whereas on this, what you see is what you get. You can do it in camera, you'll see what you get straight off, and you know you're guaranteed to be able to get it in. So I like the Keystone correction on that. The other thing that I was very, very impressed was the live composition mode on the bulb mode, where you can actually see the picture build up in a dark situation. I used to do a few shots. I used to go down to the North Lakes, down to Ullswater and places like that, usually just after dusk. And it's amazing what you can do insofar as taking photographs just after the normal sun's gone down, where you've got very, very low light, where you can build up the picture. And I found that it's difficult to judge. You're doing best guesses all the time as to what to do. With the live composition on the bulb mode, you can just leave it open and you can watch the photograph build up in the back, in the viewfinder at the back, and it really is useful. It's fantastic to do. So high marks on that. Both of these cameras have the high definition, the high megapixel mode, the 80 megapixel mode, and both of them straightforward. I believe, although I don't use that mode, I believe that the Lumix can actually do it handheld. As far as I know, it's only the EM1 Mark III and the EM5 Mark III which will do it on the Olympus, otherwise you need a tripod. But basically I don't use either. But from the reviews I've seen on them, it seems to work perfectly well. And it works by, if you don't know, they're both 20 megapixel sensors, but what it does is it uses the IBIS mechanism to move the sensor around, takes several shots, and then combines them all to get about an 80 megapixel shot. And again, I think you can downsize to about 40, but I haven't gone into that, so it's worth saying that. I've never used it, can't tell you what it's like. Both cameras, dual card slots. From a professional shooter point of view, really useful. For me, I tend to find it useful because on what I'm doing at the moment, I'll put RAW onto one card and JPEG on the other. So I've always got a backup of some description, but I also put my video onto the faster card and not on the other one, so I've got good data transfer for the video. What it does give you is a lot of options. You can write parallel to both cards exactly the same, you can write different information as I've just suggested to the two cards, and also you can fill one card up and let that, when that card reaches capacity, it'll automatically do the other card. There's lots of options on it. I did find that it wasn't so easy in the menus to set the Olympus up to what I wanted to. It was a little bit complicated trying to work out what they were actually saying you could have and couldn't have. I found the Lumix was incredibly straightforward and simple. One big difference though, the Lumix will you can use, they both got SD cards, but the Lumix has two UHS 2 card slots in it, so you can use the faster cards in both slots. The Olympus, the UHS 2 is only in card slot 1. It's only a UHS 1 in card slot 2. So there is a difference on that insofar as the write speeds. Pays your money and takes your choice. As I say, I tend to use the card slot 1 for my video, and I'll put my RAW onto there, and I'll put my JPEGs on the second one. And the reason for that is if I am doing fast shooting, which I don't do very often, then it makes sure that the buffers are nicely cleared into the card. If you're shooting RAW, for instance, your RAW's about 10 times bigger than the JPEG version of it. So again, you can nicely stream those off without having too much problem, and you get less hang-ups insofar as the data transfer and the buffering. The Lumix, the connection for the Lumix for the power and the data transfer, it's a USB 3 micro B adapter on the Lumix. The good thing is on that, you can actually use it to charge the battery up or to power the camera. You can't do both. You can't be charging the camera up, the battery up, and use the camera. But it's a great way. I use that quite often if I'm out in the field, because I can plug it into an in-car USB charger and plug it straight into the side of this, and I can be charging the camera up as I'm working. You make sure that you use a good quality regulated charger though. But yes, you can do it straight off on that. The Olympus uses the USB-C connection, and I love the USB-C, it's a good high power connection, but on this one you cannot charge the battery from that, it's only through the external charger. But the data transfer rates on both of them are superb. The other difference is on here that the HDMI leads for taking video off and for feeding into monitors for TVs for monitoring and things, on the Lumix G9 it is a full-size HDMI lead, which is great. The Olympus is the micro D HDMI lead, which makes it a little bit less adaptable. You can't just turn up to somebody's place and unplug their Skybox or whatever it is that they've got, or the DVD player to plug it into. This one you need to have the dedicated lead. So conclusions. Well, the Lumix I've been using for a couple of years now. I absolutely love it. It's great. It's not my go-to camera though. There's just, although I said that it feels really good in the hand, it's not the one that I just go to pick up. I've quite often gone to the Mark 1 of the Olympus in preference to the G9. It just feels a little bit smaller and neater. I've taken this out for the last couple of weekends now. I've just done a couple of Hadrian's Wall walk shoots using this exclusively, and I do tend to favour the feel and size of this in the hand, the Olympus. Quality wise of photographs though, there is nothing between them. I did a few shoots using both of them with the same lens on, and I did have a bit of a worry actually. It did seem, when I was shooting with the G9, it did seem that the focus seemed soft in the viewfinder at times, and that had been a little bit of a hang-up in the back of my mind. I didn't know if it was real or perceived. So when I started doing this earlier on today, I used the superb 45mm Olympus 1.8 lens. It is really sharp. It's a fantastic little lens, and I put it onto both cameras and I zoomed them into 16 times on the viewfinder. shooting the same thing with the same ISO, same aperture and same speed. So the conditions were the same, both shot on a natural scene rather than anything else, and zoomed in to 16 times. Where I did expect this to be softer, I didn't find that. I found them just about identical. And what I think it is actually, I've got so used to using prime lenses recently that now I've gone back to using the kit zoom, effectively the 12 to 60 kit zoom, which I think is a superb lens, the f3.5 to 5.6 Lumix kit lens. It's great, but you suddenly realise just how soft it is in comparison to the prime lenses that I use. And because I've come away from the professional side of shooting and come back to shooting as an enthusiastic amateur, if you like, the kit zoom should be just about perfect for what I need. Most of what I'm doing is up to social media, but it's been noticeable in the viewfinder. And because I got so used to seeing super razor sharp images from the prime lenses on the cameras, it made the G9 in my mind seem a little bit soft. So it was the lens rather than this. Can't find any difference otherwise. Downloading the photographs, as I say, with the sensors about the same size, and the quality, I can't complain at either. These, if you're shooting micro four thirds, if you can afford one of these, get one of these. Doesn't matter if it's the EM1 or the G9. They are both superb. Now there are differences insofar as the Lumix range, because you also have the G5, G5S and the newly released G5 Mark II, and they are again superb cameras. Again, got the same sensor in. However, they tend to be more orientated feature-wise to video. I'm not primarily, as I say, a video shooter, so the G9 as a still photo camera has better features in for me, and the video features in this aren't a great deal behind the GH5. So in reality, although the GH5 and GH5S and the new GH5 II are in the range, from a stills point of view, with high quality video, I would say that either of these are superb. Certainly if you're more video orientated, I'll go for the G9 rather than the Olympus. If you are shooting these in the way that I do, where you want lightweight, small cameras, I would probably err towards the Olympus. But again, the whole point of this video has been the fact that these are so close. They really are. Now, as I say, Olympus have brought out the Mark III version of the EM1, and there are some differences in there, and it's worth noting those differences. The biggest one for me is actually the in-camera charging, believe it or not. That's probably the most important of the lot. So you pay your money, takes your choice. They are superb cameras, and why would I say go for the top of the range camera? As I say, I've got a GX8, which is a lower camera in the range, and I've discussed about buying good used second-hand cameras in the past, and about not necessarily having the best in the range. So why am I saying go for the top of the range? Well, it's very simple. As I say, I'm a great fan of buying good quality used cameras, and for the price that I paid for this Olympus second-hand in immaculate, and I mean immaculate condition, with about 10,600 shutter actuations when I bought it, is about the same price as I would be paying for a brand new OM10 Mark IV, which is the current version of their entry-level DSLR shaped micro four thirds camera. Obviously you have the pen range in here and the GX range in the Lumix. But for about the same price as a brand new bottom end of the range, I'm getting the best camera in the range, the top of the range camera, of a couple of years old, but that's fine, with very little use on it, but with all the professional bells and whistles. As I say, things, silly little things like the fact that the function will lock on them both, the layout, the size of the grip really does make things comfortable, and this is what you're getting in the professional range of cameras. So I would suggest on that, if you can buy new, I would still say that the Mark III and the G9 with its revisions are so close it's untrue. So that probably hasn't helped you, because anybody who's been watching this is probably wanting a definitive answer, and I just can't give one. What I can say is I use both, and you'll find as I go through this, through these videos, you'll find that they are used pretty constantly to an equal amount, along with the GX8. The one thing I don't like about these two cameras compared to the GX8, which is a lower one though, is something which surprised me in the first place. I've been very much the SLR and DSLR user for the last 40 years. I never got into the idea of rangefinder cameras. They just did not interest me, they didn't appeal. But the GX8, you'll find that for the likes of me, having a rather large proboscis here, the GX8 is great because with the viewfinder on the side, I'm actually missing with my nose. And that might sound a bit of a silly comment, but when you've got a touch screen and you've got a camera like this, where does the nose naturally lie? Straight on the screen. And if it's enabled, you can find that you can touch the screen with your nose. So that's my conclusions on this. Both are superb cameras. If you can afford either of them, do. The thing I would suggest though, go to a dealer first. Try the cameras in your hand. Ask them if you can try the cameras. Get a common lens to both. Just the normal 25mm lens. It doesn't matter if it's the Olympus or the Lumix lens. They'll both work perfectly well. But make sure that it's the same on both and just get it in your hand and try them. Because that to me is the biggest difference as to whether the camera is going to be good or bad. Whether you feel the camera is useful for you. And as I say, for me, both of these are superb and useful. And I really can't give a conclusion as to which one's best. If you're using the G9, stick with it. If you're using the EM1, stick with it. This is Brian James, a Micro Four Thirds guy. Hope you've enjoyed this. It's been quite a lengthy video, but I've tried to give you a realistic understanding how I feel about these in the hand, in the field. They all fit my particular needs really, really well. The light, small, and although these are still quite big cameras in the range, the small and compactness of the lenses really makes the difference for me. So if you have enjoyed the video, my name is Brian James, a Micro Four Thirds guy. Leave a like below, subscribe and give me a thumbs up and maybe hit the notification bell. And if you've gleaned anything from this and you want to leave me a little thank you for a cup of coffee, there's a PayPal link below. Whatever it is, hope you've enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye bye.